By Mr. English.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, please bestow your tender healing mercies on the people of Orlando and all those affected by the tragedy there. Please help them to find peace. Please bestow your protective arms around that small subset of our society who join the armed forces and protect our liberties and allow us to have the freedoms that we have. Watch over them. Also, please bestow those same protective mercies on the men and women of the Sheriff's Department here locally who answer those 70,000 calls a year and all those of emergency services. Please provide your compassion across this country. Let us learn to respect one another again, listen to one another, and care for one another. Be with us now tonight as we exercise our privilege to freely govern. Let our actions and our words and our deeds be pleasing in your eyes. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Bailey, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rhodes?
Here.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. English?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Ms. Vanucci?
Here.
Chairman Apicella?
Here.
Myself, sir, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Are there any declarations of disqualification on any agenda item? Seeing none, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we change the agenda to slide the closed meeting till after the chairman's report.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. English. Mr. Cohen, anything further?
No, sir, I just think that it's a more appropriate time.
Mr. English?
Same here.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. It's now the public presentations portion of tonight's meeting. This is an opportunity for the public to speak on any matter except tonight's scheduled public hearing items where we have none. There will be a separate comment period normally when we have a public hearing. Please state your name and address before you start your comments and address the commission as a whole. You have 3 minutes to speak. When the green light comes on, the yellow light indicates you have 1 minute left. And when you see the red light, please wrap up your comments. If there's anyone who'd like to come forward. Seeing no rush to the podium, I'm going to close the public comment portion of tonight's meeting. Mr. Harvey, item 1.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Please recognize Mike Zaraf for the staff update on this case.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Mike Zaraf with the Planning and Zoning Department. This is a request for a project known as Patriots Crossing. It is a request to amend proffered conditions to replace a planned recreational facility with other uses and modify transportation and other site development requirements that are in place on that property. The property is 23.79 acres in Zone B2 Urban Commercial. The public hearing was conducted at your last meeting on June 8th, and the case was deferred to provide additional information in response to public comments received. Subsequently, the applicant had requested the case be deferred to the next meeting, to your next meeting on July 13th. That request is in your package that you received. This would allow them to more time to modify the proffers and general development plan in response to the comments that were provided. We did in our staff memo provide a summary of the issues that were discussed at the public hearing. Those include transportation issues, including evaluation of the revised traffic impact analysis, and then also consideration of phasing of development of the site based on the estimated vehicles per day in their traffic studies. There were public safety concerns, consideration of emergency access via Wolverine Way rather than through the Parkwood Ridge residential streets. Obtain input from the school division regarding their thoughts on the interparcel connection to Wolverine Way. And we did provide some information. We did reach out to the school board staff and they did provide some feedback. They noted that they would not be in favor of allowing commercial traffic through to Wolverine Way, on a normal basis, unless there was some sort of direct benefit to North Stafford High School. And that was probably the basis for the previous connection when there was a recreational facility. They did add that emergency access could be considered if that was desired in this location through a probably gated secure access through the school property to their site. Hitting on some of the other highlights, also there were adjacent property impacts discussed. The applicant was going to look into modifying the proffered berm language to add more objective criteria. There were concerns expressed about the car wash use and its location. Also, there was a request to consider prohibiting other uses on the property. Also, correcting prohibited use inconsistencies that were pointed out. The applicant was going to work to make those adjustments. Also, considering hours of operation limitations, and there was a preference for the office buildings adjacent to Park Ridge to be limited to 2 stories in height. So the applicant's working on those amendments. We did receive some additional comments after talking to school division staff that talked about pedestrian access between the school and the site. The HCOD, the highway corridor overlay, does require sidewalk to be constructed along Garrisonville Road, so an extension of sidewalk to Wolverine Way may resolve this request. And then also there were some other requests that highlighted pedestrian access between Park Ridge and North Stafford High School, which was in the original proffers, that be maintained, and an appropriate buffer or fencing between the school site and the development, that be provided as well. And the applicant can, these are new comments, so the applicant has, may want to expand on how they may be able to comply with some of these requests. And at this point, I'll turn it back for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zaraff. Any questions for staff? Seeing none. Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Mr. Rhodes, this is in your district.
Would the applicant like to comment, especially a couple late comments, because there wasn't a dialogue on them? Just
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and let you know that we are looking at these things. What we ran into as we started to review them was that there are some competing priorities, and we think that there are some solutions that are possibly going to resolve an issue in ways that may not have been anticipated. For example, the building height request and the height preservation of trees along the property line seem to be addressing the same concern about visibility of the office buildings from the residential neighborhood. So if we're able to reduce the height of those buildings, we think that we've also addressed the advantage or comment that we heard from the neighbor that they would like to see the existing trees preserved in certain areas and see additional evergreen type trees. So, and then the other thing that was a little bit of a competing priority was the berm. There was a request for a berm, but if you are preserving existing trees, the berm would be in conflict with that in some areas, because the berm would require clearing trees in order to construct the berm. And then we did receive some additional comments from the school board, which was requesting trails and some things that we didn't anticipate previously. So we're just trying to balance those all into the package and work through them. We checked with the fire marshal about the building standpipe, the sprinkler system, and standpipes aren't required if the building is under 40 feet in height. And so again, if we're addressing the building height as a way of addressing the screening issue, then that also addresses the standpipe. So we think there's some common solutions to some of these comments. And then finally, frankly, the VDOT confused us and surprised us by asking that we fill out certain forms and checklists in advance of a study. We prepared the study and provided it a month ago, but they're not reviewing it because we haven't filled out certain checklist items, and so we're completing those for them. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. We are very appreciative of the short deferral that you gave us. We're disappointed that we weren't able to meet that deadline. And if you could just give us a couple more weeks, then we think that we'll be able to address all of these.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to remark, Mr. Chairman, that I was appreciative of the applicants' efforts. Immediately after the meeting, they were getting the list of those who spoke so they can make sure and get back with the community members on their comments. So I continue to appreciate that outreach with the neighbors. With that, I'd make a motion for deferral to the first meeting in July.
Okay, there's a motion to defer to the first meeting in July made by Mr. Rhodes, a second by Mr. Boswell. Anything further, Mr. Rhodes?
No, sir.
Mr. Boswell? Anybody else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, that will be July 13th.
The first meeting, well, the one and only meeting in July.
Mr. Chairman, for the next two items, Mr. Zaraf will also provide a staff summary regarding Old Dominion Village.
Good evening again. So these two items are, for one, a comprehensive plan text amendment, and the second item would be a zoning reclassification to the PT&D Plan Traditional Neighborhood Development Zoning District. This would allow for a development that would include 140 residential dwelling units with a mix of single-family detached townhomes and multifamily units, and 3 live-work units, and then also approximately 99,000 square feet of commercial development as well on the site. Public hearing was conducted at your last meeting on June 8th. The Planning Commission also deferred these two applications to this meeting for staff and the applicant to provide additional information. Subsequently, the applicant also has requested the case be deferred to the July 13th meeting to fully be able to address the Commission's concerns. We've also provided a staff memo that summarizes the remaining issues on these two items, and provided some additional information as that was requested. With the text amendment to the comp plan, at the last meeting, the Commission had suggested some modifications to the comp plan language, which the applicant had no opposition to. We included that language as an attachment for reference. Also, the Commission requested a map to highlight the limits of the new land use criteria and where that would apply. We've provided a series of maps to identify potential locations. The criteria generally includes major transportation corridors within 2 miles of an interstate exit ramp, and then also within suburban land use districts. And we identified all the properties that would be located within 500 feet of the center line of those roads. And so we do have some maps if you want to see those.
Any interest? They're in our package, right?
Yes, they are. They're providing your package, and we note that it includes we identified all the properties that are within that generalized range. Understand we made a comment that not all the development, all those properties are going to realistically develop in this manner. They include a mix of older and newer developed sites and vacant parcels. So smaller lots would have to be combined with other properties to get to a minimum of 40 acres. Also, already developed lots may not redevelop. But this is just showing all the possible lots that might fall under that criteria. And then looking at the zoning reclassification, staff had noted that the project is not consistent with the T&D design recommendations, which include some criteria that landscape design should grow from the local topography and other criteria. And we note that a lot of the site is going to be cleared and graded. But also we note that development under any higher density suburban type of development would result in the same type of impact to the land use as this PT&D project would. Also, we would note that the latest version of the plan minimizes impacts to the natural resources Specifically on the eastern end of the site, the applicant had reduced the development footprint to avoid alluvial soils in this location. There were comments about the spring house. The applicant has expressed a willingness to proffer informational signage for the spring house. This change would be included in the next version of proffers when they're submitted. Also, there were some comments about the neighborhood design standards. Staff and the applicant are working on modifications to the neighborhood design standards. We met this past Monday and have agreed on a series of changes that that the applicant's going to modify in the neighborhood design standards to meet staff's concerns. So those they're working on those changes, and they'll be providing those to us in a week or so. Also, just sitting on some of the other highlights, there are prior comments noted that the recommended cash proffers guidelines are not being met, and the applicant's proposing to offset this by dedicating lots in Crow's Nest Harbor. And in response to this, and in response to requests from the commission, the applicant is working on a new fiscal impact analysis, and that's anticipated to be complete in late June. And the last point is that staff was asked to calculate the number of development rights the lots being offered in Crow's Nest Harbor might yield, consistent with the TDR regulations that are currently in place. Of all the lots that are being offered, staff has estimated a range of 166 to 185 development rights. That's dependent on the method of calculation that would occur. And if you have any questions, you also tonight received written comments from the Stafford Regional Airport Authority regarding this request. And we'll take any questions that you might have at this time.
Questions for staff? Mr. Zaraff, Mr. Harvey, I have a question. It's kind of related to what happened yesterday with the board. So they did grant our request for an extension of time. How would that affect these two applications?
Mr. Chairman, that ordinance went into effect at midnight. So therefore, now the commission has 100 days total to consider the rezoning application. However, it does not affect the comprehensive plan application. That application has a 60-day time window as prescribed by state law.
So on the first one, are we allowed an extension if the board grants it to us, or we must make a decision by the next meeting?
Mr. Chairman, with regard to the comprehensive plan amendment, that would require a decision in July unless you want to have a special meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Raff. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, and staff. My name is Deborah Ray Carnes, representing the applicant with the law firm of Lemming and Healy. Tonight, I just want to thank the commission for allowing us to have more time so far and to request that this case be deferred at least until the next meeting. New language was proposed to the comp plan amendment, which encouraged a fiscal study. We have retained the services of Dr. Bellis, and he promises to have a report to us well in time before your next meeting to allow staff to review and comment. The extensions granted to date also allowed us to meet with staff and I believe come to an agreement as to what would satisfy staff in terms of the neighborhood design standards. That will also be turned in for staff's review and subsequently your review in the next week. The opportunity to modify this application in response to staff comments, I think has rendered a much improved application that will be a memorable PT&D development that also will present to the Planning Commission the opportunity to consider preservation of crow's nest lots. I will be happy to answer any questions you have, and I thank you for your consideration to date.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Appreciate it. Ms. Bailey?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to defer the text amendment and reclassification of Old Dominion Village to the July 13th meeting. Do I need to make that a separate motion on both, or can I do that together?
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion to defer items 2 and 3 to the July 13th meeting. Any further comments, Ms. Bailey?
No further comments.
Mr. Cohen? Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries 7-0. Okay, we have no new business. Planning Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Board of Supervisors has been busy during their last two meetings and have forwarded a number of items for the Planning Commission's consideration. At the June 7th meeting, the board referred changes to the lighting ordinance for the chapter of the Stafford County zoning ordinance to make some modifications based on feedback we heard from a number of people in the design industry that have been designing commercial developments. Also, the board referred a Falmouth redevelopment overlay zone to the commission, which would essentially allow some flexibility as well as additional regulations in the historic Falmouth area for redevelopment of properties as well as new development. And then finally, the board referred on-street parking in the PT&D zone to the Planning Commission. Staff will note that that's being scheduled for a public hearing on the July 13th meeting because it goes hand in glove with the zoning proffer amendment that's been filed for the Stafford Village Center project, which is now being renamed the Garrison.
Has that one already been advertised? I looked in the paper yesterday. I didn't see it.
Yes, sir. It's been being sent to the paper. It was sent today. Thank you.
Okay.
So it should run in the paper next week and the following week.
So before we make any decisions, I have a question for our council on each of these. Just going back to clarify, if we were to put one or more of these particular items, and obviously one is already going to being scheduled for a public hearing, to what extent can we make changes that are more restrictive or less restrictive?
Chairman Apicella, it's based on two things. First, we have to look at the resolution by which the board sent it, and if they gave modification authority, which I believe they did. In most of these cases, I'd have to look at each one individually. The Planning Commission has the ability to modify the ordinance itself, and you can make the modifications more restrictive than what's been advertised, but not more expansive.
Okay, so just going to number 3, where we kind of don't have any control at this point. When I'm talking about the PT&D item. Staff had some alternative or some changes that they thought would be appropriate. If we decided to, this gets advertised, say next Tuesday, we could still make those changes.
Chairman Apicella, I'm not exactly sure of the language that staff's proposing, but I don't think there was any specific numbers in there. I think they were talking about how parking spaces are allowed and allocated and what counts. And I don't think those changes would be outside of the scope of the advertisement.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. So just to kind of work through each one of these, is there any desire by the commission on the zoning text amendment for outdoor lighting?
I'm okay with going forward with a public hearing, so if you would like a motion to do that.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and it's been seconded to move this item to a public hearing. When would that probably be, Mr. Harvey?
Mr. Chairman, that would be August the 10th.
Well, it couldn't be August the 10th. Our meeting is August
24th.
Okay.
Correct. There's only one meeting in August, and that's on the 24th.
Okay. Any comment, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
Mr.
No, sir.
Rhodes? Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Item, the Falmouth Redevelopment Overlay District.
And if I could ask Mr. Harvey a couple quick questions on that before anybody makes a motion, is that?
Yes, please.
First question is, how does this relate to the comp plan that we've sort of merged different things to? Is this going to add another layer to all our maps, or how would that mesh in? Just before we go forward with it, I'm just sort of curious.
Yes, Mr. Cohen, this is one of the implementation tools that have been identified in the comprehensive plan with
Cool.
regard to the Falmouth redevelopment area. It recommends we have additional zoning regulations which can add flexibility for future development, but also the board was concerned about how buildings would look in Falmouth and make sure that any future developments in character with the historic nature of that area. So in the proposed regulations, building additions and new construction would be required to go to the Architectural Review Board for review and compatibility with the established historic guidelines for the overall area. Also, the overlays district is a zoning category and a zoning district, so staff will have to provide notice to the affected owners within that area, and it would be an additional designation on the zoning map for those specific properties.
And then secondly, if memory serves, and if it doesn't, I'm hoping you'll let me know. But couldn't by right people do cemeteries in there? And can we pull that out if after the public hearing, when we look at it, we think that certain categories should be taken out, or is it just sort of a catch-all?
Mr. Cohen, the draft amendment does have some additional uses which could be permitted in the entire overlay, which may not be permitted in the underlying zone. So that would be something certainly during the public hearing process. If the commission felt the ordinance went too far and wanted to pull back some of those uses, you could eliminate those.
Thank you.
Mr. Harvey, since this affects a particular area, what kind of notice are the folks who reside in or have a business in the area? What would they get to let them know it's kind of public hearing?
Any property owner that'd be subject to this overlay zone would receive a written notice from my office explaining the nature of the public hearing and time, place for the opportunity for them to come and speak to the Planning Commission about the proposed amendment and how it affects their property.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, what's the will of the commission?
I'll make a motion to send this to public hearing.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and it's been seconded to put this to public hearing. Any further comment, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
Mr. Rhodes?
No, sir.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And as you indicated, the PT&D item's already been scheduled for public hearing.
Yes, sir. And continuing on with my report, yesterday the Board of Supervisors referred a number of amendments to the commission for various different things. One of them, and they're in your handouts at your desk, one of them was a proposed amendment to the zoning regulations regarding non-conforming non-residential structures. Currently, our zoning ordinance allows, if there's a single-family detached home that exists that is non-conforming for some reason, typically due to setback, they can continue to expand that structure as long as the expansion doesn't encroach further into the setback and create more nonconformity problems. This proposed amendment would extend that capability to all structures, whether residential or non-residential. So this worked through the Community and Economic Development Committee and the whole board itself, and they felt that it's worthy of conducting this hearing to allow the possibility for businesses to expand. One of the significant issues we've seen over time is our roads continue to get wider, especially along corridors like Garrisonville Road and Warrenton Road. Buildings that complied with setback requirements at one point in time may no longer because of the encroachment of the road right away. So currently under the ordinance as it's written, those businesses can't expand. Those buildings are locked into place. They can't be significantly modified. This ordinance would allow them to expand their business because they may not have any other restrictions as far as parking and other things on their site. So the board felt this would probably be a good amendment to help economic development. Also, there's a proposed amendment dealing with road right-of-way. Similarly, we see situations, as I described earlier, with roads expanding over time. Our comprehensive plan identifies the various different roadways in the county that we feel need to be upgraded. For instance, from an existing narrow 2-lane road to a wider 2-lane road, or maybe even a 4-lane road. In many cases, you have existing structures that are built, and they may be built in today's standards to meet current setbacks. But in our ordinances, if they're either subdividing the property to create a new neighborhood, or they're submitting a site plan, for instance, to add on to a building, they're required to dedicate right-of-way. In some instances, they may not be able to dedicate right-of-way because the building's too close to the existing right-of-way. So this proposed amendment would allow some relief that they would have to dedicate as much right-of-way as they possibly can without creating a nonconformity. And then the third amendment that was referred to the commission deals with signs. And in particular, our current ordinance in the commercial and industrial zones allows a sign on the back of the building, but it's limited to 10 square feet. We have a number of situations in the county, specifically along major roads like Garrisonville Road and Route 1, where you have a large complex of buildings, and oftentimes the fronts of the buildings face the parking lot, which is set up like an interior courtyard. And therefore, the back of the building is facing the main road where it has the most visibility. And there have been concerns and complaints that in those situations, those buildings are not put on equal parity with other buildings that front directly on the main road. So this ordinance would eliminate the requirement to limiting the signage to 10 square feet. Basically, the owner of the building can put as much square footage on any one of the 4 walls of their building as they deem necessary, provided it meets the maximum, doesn't exceed the maximum square footage allowed for that building or in that zone. So it doesn't add any more square footage that someone's entitled to, but it does expand the opportunity for them to have more signage on the rear of their buildings.
So I presume the clock has started on all 3 of these. Do we know what the deadline is? All zoning text amendments?
It would be 100 days from yesterday, and that would be probably towards the end of September.
So we have some time if we decided to sit on these and
Yes.
kind of absorb it.
And you may want to consider some of those with the scheduling of the meeting, since we have the one on July 13th and then one on August 24th. I will note that the board felt that the sign ordinance amendment had some urgency to it and was requesting the commission consider taking that up as soon as you can. Also, with the sign ordinance discussion, there was some general discussion about whether or not painted signs on walls were appropriate, and also the size of painted walls. So the board asked the commission to consider discussing that. It's not part of this current amendment dealing with size of signs on the backs of buildings, but it was a side discussion that the board had asked the commission to look into.
Okay, is there any preference by the commission in dealing with each of these? I think we have a bit of work in July, right? So we might want to start these in August.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, the ad for the July meeting went to the paper today, so we'd have to convince the paper to allow us to modify the ad to add something onto it if we want to.
So is there any thought or consideration by my fellow commissioners to put the sign changes to a public hearing?
I recommend we put the sign changes on the July agenda, please.
The July or the August?
July.
And then if the paper makes
If the
it-
paper allows us to do it.
Yeah, and then if the paper doesn't agree, we could defer to August.
Right.
Is that workable?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Motion, yep.
I'm going to
Motion
take
made.
that as a motion by Mr. English.
Yes.
And a second by Ms. Fanucci. A third by Mr. Rhodes. Fourth by Mr. Cohen. Any further comment?
No,
Mr.
sir.
English?
No, sir.
Ms. Vanucci? Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 7-0.
And
Which would you say is the next urgent one, if either of the two remaining hearing? fit in that
Of the
category?
two remaining, the right-of-way dedication and non-conforming residential structures, they both go hand in glove. They're more technical in nature. It would be at the commission's discretion as to when you want to schedule them.
Mr. Chairman, I would just from calendar perspective, again, the 100 days takes us to about the 30th of September, so it'll give us 2 sessions in September and only the one in August. If we, a consideration might be to do both in August, which gives us time if there's some reason we need to rework on something versus jamming us into one meeting.
Is that a motion, Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. By a nose, I'm going to say it's Ms. Bailey. Motion made by Mr. Rhodes, seconded by Ms. Bailey to schedule this for our meeting, these two for our meeting in August. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries 7-0. Anything else, Mr.?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, included in your background materials was the listing of annual expenditures. This is closing out the fiscal year at the end of this month. Plan Commission has stayed within budget, and we have no issues or problems.
So we can use the remaining funds for that retreat that we've never really had outside of the building?
The remaining funds will revert to the general fund, and they'll be dealt with in the manner that the Board of Supervisors sees fit.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey.
That concludes my report.
County Attorney's report.
I have no report at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. There are no committees. I have no report. So close meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to Virginia Section 2.2-3711A7, the Commission desires to hold a closed meeting for consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Is there a second? Okay, there's a motion to go into closed meeting made by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Mr. Rhodes. Any further comment, Mr. Cohen? Mr. Rhodes? Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries 7-0. like to call this meeting back to order.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Stafford County Planning Commission on this, the 22nd day of June 2016, that it be and hereby does certify that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act were discussed in closed meeting, to which this certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the said closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered by the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, there's been a motion. It's been seconded. Any further comments, Mr. Cohen? Mr. English?
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries 7-0. Other business, TRC information. Everybody has theirs, I hope. Approval of minutes. Okay. Motion seconded to approve the minutes of May 25th, 2016. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. All opposed, motion carries 7-0. This meeting's adjourned.